Have you ever wondered why loving others feels natural, yet loving yourself feels uncomfortable, almost wrong? Why you forgive people who hurt you, but punish yourself endlessly for mistakes you have already outgrown? Buddhism teaches that this inner battle is not discipline, and it is not humility. It is suffering that has gone unnoticed. Self-love is not something you learn from the world. It is something you remember when you stop fighting yourself. And when that remembrance begins, your self-worth does not just improve, it quietly heals from the inside out. 1. You are worthy without proving anything. Buddhism teaches that your value is not something you earn through pain, struggle, success, or the approval of others. Your worth is not a reward that comes after you suffer enough, work hard enough, or please everyone around you. Yet many people unknowingly live their entire lives as if love must be justified and rest must be deserved. They feel guilty when they slow down, ashamed when they fail, and anxious when they are not achieving something visible. This mindset quietly creates exhaustion because it turns life into a never-ending test where the passing mark is always moving further away. No matter how much you do, it never feels like enough, because the belief itself is flawed. Buddhist wisdom gently corrects this misunderstanding by reminding us that worth is inherent. You are valuable simply because you exist. Nothing more is required. In nature, nothing tries to prove its right to be here. A flower does not apologize for blooming late, and it does not compete with other flowers to feel important. A river does not stop flowing because someone criticizes its direction. It does not speed up because someone praises it. It flows according to its nature. In the same way, your worth does not rise when people admire you, and it does not collapse when people ignore or reject you. Praise and criticism are temporary sounds in the world. They do not touch the truth of who you are. When you believe you must prove yourself, you begin to live for external validation. You measure your value through productivity, relationships, appearance, or success. Buddhism teaches that this attachment to validation is a major source of suffering because it places your self-worth in the hands of others, where it is constantly unstable. One day you feel worthy, the next day you feel invisible. But when you understand that your worth is not dependent on outcomes or opinions, something inside you relaxes. You stop performing for love. You stop explaining your existence. You stop shrinking or overextending yourself just to be accepted. Letting go of the need to prove your worth is an act of deep self-love. It does not make you lazy or unmotivated. Instead, it frees your energy. The energy that was once wasted on comparison, people-pleasing, and self-judgment becomes available for peace, clarity, and genuine growth. You begin to act from truth instead of fear. You work, rest, love, and grow not because you are trying to earn your place in the world, but because it is natural to do so. Self-love truly begins when you allow yourself to exist without apology, when you stop asking, "Am I enough?" and start understanding that the question itself was never necessary. Buddhism teaches that you were never unworthy to begin with, you simply forgot. 2. Self-compassion is not weakness, it is wisdom. Many people grow up believing that being hard on themselves is the only way to improve. They think self-criticism keeps them disciplined, strong, and successful. When they make a mistake, they punish themselves with harsh words, shame, and guilt, believing this will stop them from failing again. Buddhism teaches that this belief is deeply misguided. Cruelty toward yourself does not create growth, it creates fear. And fear may force short-term change, but it slowly destroys self-worth from the inside. Buddhist wisdom explains that the mind learns best in an atmosphere of safety, not punishment. When you attack yourself for every flaw, your nervous system enters a state of tension and survival. In this state, you are not learning, healing, or growing. You are simply trying to protect yourself from your own inner voice. Over time, this constant inner pressure leads to anxiety, emotional exhaustion, and a feeling that you are never good enough, no matter how hard you try. Self-compassion in Buddhism does not mean ignoring your mistakes or avoiding responsibility. It means responding to your imperfections with understanding rather than hatred. It is the ability to say, "I see my mistake and I will learn from it," instead of saying, "I am a failure." This shift may seem small, but it changes everything. When compassion replaces self-attack, the mind relaxes, clarity increases, and real transformation becomes possible. Think about how you treat someone you love when they are struggling. You do not insult them or remind them of every past failure. You listen, you encourage, you give them time to heal. Buddhism asks a simple but powerful question: why do you deny yourself the same kindness you freely give to others? Your pain does not make you undeserving of care. In fact, pain is exactly when compassion is needed most. Buddhist practice teaches that wisdom is the ability to see clearly without judgment. When you look at yourself with compassion, you begin to see your patterns honestly instead of defensively. You notice where you are hurting, where you are afraid, and where you are still learning. This awareness allows change to happen naturally. Growth guided by compassion is slower, but it is deeper and lasting. Growth driven by self-hate may look productive on the surface, but it leaves wounds underneath. As self-compassion becomes a habit, your relationship with yourself changes. You stop fearing mistakes because they no longer threaten your worth. You stop pushing yourself to exhaustion just to feel deserving. You begin to trust yourself more because you know you will not abandon yourself when things go wrong. This trust is the foundation of self-worth. Buddhism teaches that true strength is gentleness with awareness. When you learn to treat yourself with compassion, you are not becoming weak, you are becoming wise. And from that wisdom, a quiet, unshakable sense of self-love begins to grow. 3. You are not your thoughts or emotions. One of the most freeing teachings in Buddhism is the understanding that thoughts and emotions are experiences, not identities. Yet many people live as if every thought that appears in the mind is a fact, and every emotion they see must define who they are. When sadness arises, they say, "I am broken." When fear appears, they say, "I am weak." When anger surfaces, they say, "This is who I am." Buddhism gently explains that this confusion is a major cause of inner suffering. The mind produces thoughts constantly, just as the lungs breathe or the heart beats. Most of these thoughts are automatic, conditioned by past experiences, fears, memories, and expectations. They arise on their own, stay briefly, and then fade away. Buddhism teaches that the problem is not the thoughts themselves, but the attachment to them. When you believe every thought, you give it power over your self-worth. A single negative thought can suddenly feel like the truth about your entire life. Through mindfulness, Buddhism teaches you to observe thoughts rather than identify with them. You learn to notice a thought without judging it and without following it. Instead of saying, "I am not good enough," you begin to recognize, "A thought of not being good enough is passing through my mind." This small shift creates space. In that space, the thought loses its authority. It no longer defines you. It simply exists for a moment and then moves on. The same understanding applies to emotions. Emotions are natural responses to conditions, not permanent states. They rise and fall like waves in the ocean. When you resist them or cling to them, they become heavier and more painful. Buddhism teaches acceptance, not suppression. When you allow emotions to be felt without labeling yourself because of them, they pass more gently. Sadness does not mean you are broken. Anxiety does not mean you are failing. Anger does not mean you are a bad person. They are signals, not identities. This belief heals self-worth because it separates your value from your inner weather. On difficult days, you no longer feel like you have lost yourself. You understand that a cloudy mind does not mean a damaged sky. Beneath every passing thought and emotion, there is awareness, steady and unchanged. Buddhism teaches that this awareness is closer to your true nature than any thought you have about yourself. As you practice observing instead of identifying, you become less controlled by your inner world. Negative thoughts lose their grip. Emotional pain becomes more manageable. You stop reacting automatically and start responding with clarity. This creates a sense of inner stability that does not depend on mood or circumstance. When you realize you are not your thoughts and emotions, self-love becomes easier. You stop fighting yourself. You stop judging your worth based on what you feel in a moment. You begin to trust that even when the mind is loud, your true self remains untouched. This understanding is deeply healing because it allows you to experience life fully without losing yourself to it. 4. Letting go is an act of self-love. Buddhism teaches that much of our suffering does not come from what happens to us, but from what we refuse to release. We hold tightly to past mistakes, painful memories, broken relationships, unmet expectations, and old versions of ourselves, believing that holding on somehow protects us or proves our loyalty to what once mattered. In reality, this clinging quietly drains our emotional energy and keeps old wounds alive. Letting go, in Buddhist wisdom, is not loss. It is relief. It is the moment you choose peace over punishment. Many people misunderstand letting go as weakness, avoidance, or forgetting. Buddhism teaches that letting go does not mean denying what happened or pretending it did not hurt. It means you stop carrying the weight of it every day. When you replay the past again and again in your mind, you are not learning from it anymore. You are reliving it. Each repetition strengthens pain instead of wisdom. Letting go is the decision to learn the lesson without reopening the wound. Buddhism explains that attachment is the root of suffering because it binds your happiness to things that are always changing. When you cling to how people should have treated you, how life should have turned out, or who you believe you should have been by now, you create constant inner resistance. This resistance shows up as regret, bitterness, self-blame, and quiet sadness. Letting go softens that resistance. It allows life to move again. One of the deepest acts of self-love is releasing the habit of punishing yourself for the past. Many people believe that holding on to guilt proves accountability, but Buddhism teaches that excessive guilt is simply another form of attachment. True accountability is learning, adjusting, and moving forward with awareness. When you forgive yourself, you are not excusing your mistakes. You are acknowledging your humanity. Growth cannot happen when you are chained to who you used to be. Letting go also means releasing people and situations that no longer align with your peace. Buddhism does not teach blind attachment. It teaches mindful connection. When something consistently brings suffering, anxiety, or self-betrayal, holding on to it is not love, it is fear. Choosing to step back, set boundaries, or walk away silently is often an act of deep self-respect. You are not abandoning others, you are choosing not to abandon yourself. As you practice letting go, you may notice fear arising. The mind fears emptiness, uncertainty, and change. Buddhism teaches that this fear is natural, but it is not a signal to stop. On the other side of letting go is space, and in that space, clarity appears. You begin to breathe more easily. Your thoughts become lighter. Your heart becomes less guarded. This is not because life has become perfect, but because you are no longer carrying what was never meant to stay. Self-love grows when you understand that you do not need to hold on to pain to honor your story. Your experiences have shaped you, but they do not have to imprison you. Letting go is the quiet courage to trust that peace is possible without reliving suffering. Buddhism teaches that when you release what no longer serves you, you are not losing anything essential. You are returning to yourself. 5. Your pain does not make you unworthy. Buddhism teaches a truth that many people struggle to accept. Pain does not reduce your worth, and suffering does not mean there is something wrong with you. Yet so many people silently believe the opposite. When life hurts, when relationships break, when plans collapse, or when the heart feels heavy for no clear reason, they begin to judge themselves. They think, if I was stronger, this wouldn't hurt, or if I were better, my life wouldn't look like this. Over time, pain becomes personalized, and instead of being seen as an experience, it becomes an identity. This belief slowly damages self-worth and creates unnecessary inner suffering. Buddhism explains that suffering is not a personal failure. It is a universal condition of being human. Every living being experiences loss, disappointment, fear, and uncertainty. No one escapes this reality, no matter how successful, spiritual, or disciplined they appear. The problem begins when pain is interpreted as evidence of unworthiness. When this happens, a person does not just feel pain, they feel ashamed of their pain. They hide it, suppress it, or turn it inward as self-blame. Buddhism teaches that this added layer of judgment is what deepens suffering, not the pain itself. Pain often arrives when something meaningful is changing. It may come from attachment, unmet expectations, or the natural ending of a phase in life. Buddhism does not teach that pain should be avoided at all costs. It teaches that pain should be understood. When you meet pain with awareness instead of resistance, it begins to soften. When you stop asking, "Why am I like this?" and start asking, "What is this pain showing me?" your relationship with suffering changes. Pain becomes a teacher rather than a punishment. Many people believe they must be healed before they deserve love, peace, or rest. Buddhism gently challenges this belief. You do not need to be fixed to be worthy of compassion. You do not need to be strong all the time to deserve kindness. Pain does not disqualify you from love. It invites deeper care. Just as a wound requires gentleness to heal, inner pain requires patience and understanding, not harsh discipline. When you deny yourself compassion because you are hurting, you delay your own healing. Buddhist wisdom also teaches impermanence, the understanding that all states, including pain, are temporary. No emotion, no situation, and no suffering lasts forever. When you remember this, pain loses some of its power over your identity. You stop seeing yourself as a broken person and begin to see yourself as a person experiencing pain. This shift is subtle, but it restores dignity. You are not defined by your hardest moments. They pass through you, but they do not become you. Pain can also deepen empathy, awareness, and wisdom. Buddhism teaches that those who have suffered often develop a deeper understanding of others. They become more patient, more compassionate, and more present. This does not mean pain is desirable, but it means it is not meaningless. When you stop rejecting your pain, it transforms. It opens the heart instead of hardening it. It teaches you how to be gentle with yourself and others. Another important Buddhist insight is that resisting pain often intensifies it. When you fight your emotions, judge them, or rush to escape them, they tend to linger. Acceptance does not mean liking pain or giving up. It means allowing the experience to exist without adding self-criticism. When you sit with pain calmly, acknowledging it without labeling yourself as weak or broken, it begins to move. This is how healing starts, not through force, but through presence. Your self-worth should not depend on how well you handle suffering. Some days you will feel strong, Other days you will feel exhausted and overwhelmed. Buddhism teaches that both states are equally human. You do not lose value on your difficult days. You do not need to earn your right to rest. Pain does not make you less deserving of peace. It makes peace more necessary. When you understand that pain does not define your worth, you stop abandoning yourself during hard times. Instead of turning against yourself, you turn inward with care. You begin to speak to yourself more gently. You allow yourself to heal at your own pace. This is where self-love deepens, not in perfection, but in presence. Buddhism reminds us that even the lotus flower grows in muddy water. The mud does not ruin the flower, it nourishes it. In the same way, your pain does not contaminate your worth. It is part of the conditions that shape your growth. When you stop seeing pain as proof of failure and start seeing it as part of being alive, something inside you relaxes. You realize you were never unworthy. You were simply human, learning, feeling, and growing through life as it unfolds. 6. Comparison steals inner peace. Buddhism teaches that comparison is one of the quietest but most destructive habits of the mind. It does not arrive loudly like anger or fear. It whispers. It looks harmless at first, even motivating. You see someone else's success, confidence, beauty, or progress, and the mind begins to measure. Slowly, almost unnoticed, your attention moves away from your own life and starts living in someone else's shadow. Over time, this habit drains joy, weakens self-worth, and creates a constant sense of insufficiency, no matter how much you grow. The Buddha taught that suffering arises when the mind clings to ideas that are not grounded in reality. Comparison is one of those ideas. It assumes that everyone is running the same race, under the same conditions, with the same starting point and the same purpose. In truth, every life is shaped by countless unique causes and conditions. Different families, different wounds, different timing, different lessons. When you compare yourself to others, you ignore this reality and judge yourself by a distorted standard that was never meant for you. Comparison often begins externally, but ends internally. At first, you compare achievements, relationships, appearances, or lifestyles. But soon, the comparison turns into self-judgment. You start questioning your worth, your pace, and your direction. You tell yourself that you are behind, that you should be more by now, that something is wrong with you. Buddhism teaches that this inner dialogue is not truth, it is attachment to illusion. It is the ego trying to define your value through contrast instead of awareness. One of the deepest harms of comparison is that it steals your presence. When your attention is constantly on what others are doing, you are not fully living your own life. You miss your progress because you are busy measuring it against someone else's highlight. You overlook your healing because you are focused on someone else's destination. Buddhism teaches mindfulness, the practice of returning attention to the present moment. When you are fully present with your own path, comparison loses its grip because awareness has no interest in competition. Buddhism also teaches that desire rooted in comparison leads to dissatisfaction. When you want something simply because someone else has it, that desire is not aligned with your true needs. Even if you achieve it, the satisfaction is temporary. The mind quickly finds a new comparison, a new standard, a new reason to feel incomplete. This cycle creates endless restlessness. Peace becomes impossible because there is always someone ahead, someone doing better, someone who appears happier. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that peace does not come from being above others. It comes from being aligned with yourself. Another important teaching is that comparison blinds you to impermanence. You compare your worst moments to someone else's best moments, forgetting that everything changes. The person you envy today may struggle tomorrow. The success you admire may come with pain you cannot see. Buddhism teaches that clinging to appearances is dangerous because appearances are unstable. When you understand impermanence, comparison feels less convincing. You realize that no external situation guarantees lasting happiness, and no current struggle defines your future. Comparison also interferes with compassion, both for yourself and others. When you see life as a competition, it becomes harder to feel genuine joy for someone else's success or genuine kindness toward your own struggles. Buddhism encourages mudita, the practice of sympathetic joy, the ability to be happy for others without feeling diminished. This practice heals self-worth because it removes the idea that someone else's light makes you darker. There is room for many paths, many forms of success, and many expressions of peace. Letting go of comparison does not mean losing ambition or awareness. It means redefining success. Buddhism teaches that success is inner clarity, not outer comparison. It is the ability to live with integrity, mindfulness, and compassion, regardless of how your life looks next to someone else's. When you measure yourself by your own values instead of others' outcomes, your self-worth becomes stable. You stop rushing, you stop doubting your timing, you trust that your path is unfolding as it needs to. As comparison fades, something gentle but powerful takes its place: appreciation. You begin to notice your growth without dismissing it. You recognize how far you have come without needing external confirmation. You feel gratitude for your unique journey, including its struggles, because they have shaped your awareness. Buddhism teaches that contentment arises not from having more, but from needing less. When you no longer need to compare, you need less validation, less approval, and less reassurance from the world. Comparison steals inner peace because it pulls you away from your own life. Buddhism invites you back to your breath, back to your experience, back to your truth. When you stop measuring yourself against others, you return to yourself, and in that return, self-love becomes quieter, deeper, and more real. 7. Growth happens through awareness, not force. Many people believe that growth requires pressure, struggle, and constant self-correction. They push themselves relentlessly, thinking that if they are not uncomfortable, they are not improving. They force habits, suppress emotions, and judge themselves harshly whenever they fall short of an ideal version they carry in their mind. Buddhism teaches that this approach to growth is rooted in misunderstanding. True transformation does not come from force, it comes from awareness. And awareness grows quietly, patiently, and without violence toward the self. When growth is forced, it is driven by fear. Fear of being left behind, fear of not being enough, fear of repeating the past. This fear may create temporary discipline, but it also creates tension in the body and mind. Buddhism explains that a tense mind cannot see clearly. When you are constantly pushing yourself, you are reacting, not understanding. You are trying to escape who you are instead of learning from who you are. This is why forced change often leads to burnout, relapse, or quiet resentment toward yourself. Buddhist wisdom teaches that awareness is the foundation of all lasting change. Awareness means seeing things as they are, without judgment and without distortion. When you become aware of your habits, emotions, and patterns, you no longer need to fight them. You begin to understand why they exist. You see how they were formed, what they protect, and what they respond to. This understanding naturally weakens harmful patterns, because what is fully seen no longer needs to hide or repeat itself. Think of awareness like light entering a dark room. You do not need to chase the darkness away, you simply turn on the light. In the same way, when you bring awareness to a destructive habit, you do not need to attack yourself for it. You notice when it appears, how it feels, and what triggers it. Slowly, without force, its power begins to fade. Buddhism teaches that change driven by awareness is gentle, but it is real. It reshapes behavior from the inside rather than controlling it from the outside. Many people try to grow by controlling themselves, but Buddhism teaches growth through understanding the self. Control creates resistance. Understanding creates cooperation. When you observe your mind patiently, you begin to see that many of your struggles are not flaws, but responses. They formed at a time when you were trying to survive, cope, or protect yourself. When you see this, self-judgment softens, compassion arises, and in that compassion, growth becomes possible. Another reason forced growth fails is because it ignores timing. Buddhism teaches that everything unfolds according to conditions. Just as a seed cannot be rushed into becoming a tree, inner growth cannot be rushed without consequences. When you pressure yourself to heal faster, change faster, or become better faster, you disconnect from your natural rhythm. This creates frustration and self-doubt. Awareness respects timing. It allows growth to happen at the pace your nervous system can sustain. Buddhist practice emphasizes mindfulness because mindfulness keeps you connected to the present moment. Growth does not happen in the future. It happens now through small moments of awareness. Each time you notice a thought without reacting, growth happens. Each time you pause instead of repeating an old pattern, growth happens. Each time you choose understanding over self-attack, growth happens. These moments may feel insignificant, but they accumulate. Over time, they reshape your inner world. Force often comes from the belief that you are broken and need fixing. Buddhism teaches a different view. You are not broken. You are conditioned, and conditioning can be understood. When you see yourself through this lens, your relationship with growth changes. You stop trying to destroy parts of yourself and start listening to them. You ask what they need instead of trying to silence them. This approach heals self-worth because it removes the idea that something is fundamentally wrong with you. Awareness also builds trust in yourself. When you grow through force, you live in fear of failure. You are constantly watching for mistakes, afraid that one slip will undo everything. When growth comes through awareness, failure loses its power. Mistakes become information rather than proof of inadequacy. You trust that even when you fall, awareness will guide you back. This trust is essential for long-term transformation. Buddhism teaches that the mind becomes stable not through control but through familiarity. When you observe your inner world daily, you become familiar with it. You recognize patterns early. You respond with calm instead of panic. Growth becomes less dramatic and more natural. It feels less like changing who you are and more like remembering who you are beneath conditioning. As awareness deepens, effort becomes lighter. You still take action, but it is no longer fueled by fear or self-hatred. It is guided by clarity. You make changes because they feel aligned, not because you are trying to escape yourself. This kind of growth is sustainable. It does not exhaust you. It strengthens you quietly. Self-love grows naturally when growth is awareness-based. You stop seeing yourself as a project that needs constant improvement and start seeing yourself as a living process that needs attention and care. You become patient with your own unfolding. You allow yourself to learn slowly, and in that patience, transformation becomes deeper and more stable than anything force could ever create. Buddhism reminds us that water shapes stone not by force, but by consistency and presence. In the same way, awareness shapes the self. When you stop forcing change and start observing with honesty and compassion, growth no longer feels like a battle. It feels like a return. 8. Peace is your natural state. Buddhism teaches that peace is not something you must earn, chase, or build from scratch. It is not a reward for becoming better, calmer, more spiritual, or more successful. Peace is your natural state beneath layers of fear, attachment, conditioning, and constant mental noise. Yet many people live as if peace exists somewhere in the future, waiting for the moment when life finally becomes perfect. They tell themselves, "I'll be peaceful when things settle down," or "I'll feel calm once I fix myself." Buddhism gently reveals that this search itself is what keeps peace hidden. From a Buddhist perspective, suffering arises not because peace is absent, but because the mind is restless and attached. The mind constantly reaches outward, seeking reassurance, control, certainty, and validation. It clings to outcomes, identities, and expectations, believing they will finally provide safety. But because everything in life is impermanent, these external anchors never hold for long. The moment something changes, peace disappears again. Buddhism teaches that lasting peace cannot depend on conditions that are always changing. Many people mistake peace for emotional numbness or a life without problems. Buddhism does not promise a pain-free life. Instead, it teaches a peaceful relationship with life as it is. Peace is not the absence of difficulty, it is the absence of inner resistance to difficulty. When you stop fighting reality, peace begins to surface naturally. This does not mean you stop caring or stop trying. It means you stop exhausting yourself by mentally arguing with what already exists. One of the greatest obstacles to peace is the belief that you are incomplete. When you believe something is missing within you, the mind becomes restless. It searches endlessly for improvement, approval, or transformation, never allowing rest. Buddhism teaches that this belief is a misunderstanding of your true nature. Beneath thoughts, roles, and stories, there is awareness, quiet and steady. This awareness does not need fixing, it is already whole. When you reconnect with this awareness, peace is not created, it is remembered. The practice of mindfulness is central to this understanding. Mindfulness teaches you to return to the present moment, again and again, without judgment. The present moment is where peace lives, because it is free from regret about the past and fear of the future. When your attention rests fully in now, the mind has nothing to defend or chase. Even if life is challenging, there is a sense of groundedness. Buddhism teaches that peace arises naturally when the mind stops wandering away from what is happening. Another reason peace feels distant is because many people are addicted to mental noise. The mind stays busy as a form of protection. It believes that constant thinking will prevent pain, control outcomes, or maintain identity. Buddhism teaches that this constant thinking actually creates suffering. Peace is found not by solving every thought, but by learning to rest between thoughts. In the silence between mental movements, peace quietly reveals itself. Buddhist meditation is not about forcing calm or emptying the mind. It is about observing the mind without interference. When you stop trying to control your experience, tension dissolves. Thoughts come and go, emotions rise and fall, but awareness remains steady. Over time, you realize that peace was never absent. It was simply covered by constant effort and resistance. Peace is also blocked by attachment to identity. When you define yourself rigidly as successful or failing, strong or weak, spiritual or lost, the mind becomes defensive. It constantly tries to protect or improve this identity. Buddhism teaches non-attachment to identity, not because identity is bad, but because clinging to it creates fear. When you loosen your grip on who you think you must be, you create space. In that space, peace naturally settles. Many people believe they must resolve every emotional wound before they deserve peace. Buddhism teaches the opposite. Peace is what allows wounds to heal. When you give yourself permission to be peaceful even while healing, the process becomes gentler. You stop reopening wounds through self-judgment. You allow emotions to move without drowning in them. Peace becomes a supportive ground rather than a distant goal. Compassion is another doorway to peace. When you meet yourself with kindness instead of criticism, inner conflict softens. Buddhism teaches that inner peace grows when the inner war ends. Every time you stop attacking yourself for being human, peace expands. Every time you accept a moment without trying to escape it, peace deepens. Peace also grows through acceptance of impermanence. When you understand that everything changes, you stop demanding permanence from temporary things. You enjoy moments without clinging. You endure hardship without despair. Buddhism teaches that acceptance of change is not passive, it is wise. It allows you to move with life instead of against it. When resistance fades, peace flows naturally. Another subtle teaching is that peace cannot be forced. The more you try to be peaceful, the more tense you become. Buddhism invites effortlessness. Peace emerges when striving ends. When you stop measuring your spiritual progress, stop comparing your inner life to others, and stop chasing an ideal state, peace finds you. It arrives quietly, often unnoticed at first, like a calm breath you didn't realize you were holding. As this understanding deepens, self-love transforms. You stop seeing yourself as a problem to be solved and start experiencing yourself as a space in which life unfolds. You trust yourself more. You fear less. You become less reactive, not because you suppress emotions, but because you understand them. Peace becomes less fragile because it no longer depends on circumstances. Buddhism teaches that peace is not separate from you. It is not hidden in silence, mountains, or meditation cushions. It is present even in noise, confusion, and struggle, waiting for recognition. When you stop seeking peace outside and start removing what blocks awareness inside, peace reveals itself naturally. This is the deepest form of self-love, not improving yourself endlessly, but resting in your true nature, not escaping life, but meeting it fully. When you remember that peace is your natural state, life begins to feel lighter, clearer, and more meaningful. You realize you were never far from peace. You were only distracted from it. 9. Self-love is a daily practice, not a destination. Buddhism teaches that self-love is not a single realization you reach once and keep forever. It is not an achievement, a mindset you unlock, or a permanent emotional state. Self-love is a living practice that must be returned to again and again, especially on difficult days. Many people suffer because they believe self-love should feel constant and effortless once they understand it. When old doubts resurface or painful emotions return, they assume they have failed. Buddhism gently corrects this misunderstanding by reminding us that everything in life is impermanent, including our inner states. The goal is not to never struggle, but to learn how to meet struggle with care. Self-love as a practice means choosing awareness over autopilot each day. It means noticing how you speak to yourself when things go wrong, how you treat yourself when you are tired, and how you respond to your own pain. Most people unknowingly practice self-neglect daily through harsh self-talk, unrealistic expectations, and constant self-pressure. Buddhism teaches that transformation begins not with grand changes, but with small, repeated acts of mindfulness. Each moment of awareness is a moment of self-love. One of the most important Buddhist insights is that the mind returns to old patterns under stress. This does not mean you are regressing, it means you are human. When life becomes heavy, the mind reaches for familiar habits, even if they cause suffering. Self-love does not mean eliminating these patterns overnight. It means recognizing them without judgment and gently redirecting yourself again. Every time you notice and return, the practice deepens. Daily self-love also means respecting your limits. Buddhism teaches the middle way. a path of balance between excess and deprivation. Many people swing between extremes, pushing themselves relentlessly and then collapsing into exhaustion. True self-love honors effort and rest equally. It listens to the body, respects emotional capacity, and understands that slowing down is not failure. When you rest without guilt, you heal your relationship with yourself. Another key aspect of daily self-love is patience. Buddhist wisdom teaches that impatience with yourself is a form of self-rejection. When you rush your healing, you imply that your current state is unacceptable. This creates inner conflict. Patience, on the other hand, communicates trust. It says, "I allow myself to grow in time." Growth guided by patience is sustainable because it does not fight against your nervous system or emotional reality. Self-love as a practice also involves forgiveness, not a one-time forgiveness, but repeated forgiveness. You will forget your lessons. You will react in ways you later regret. You will fall back into old fears. Buddhism teaches that each moment is new. You are not defined by what happened yesterday or 5 minutes ago. Forgiving yourself repeatedly keeps your heart open. Without forgiveness, awareness turns into self-surveillance, and growth becomes rigid. Buddhist practice emphasizes compassion toward suffering. This includes your own suffering. Many people believe compassion should only be offered to others. They minimize their own pain, telling themselves they should be stronger or more grateful. Buddhism teaches that compassion without discrimination is wisdom. Your pain deserves care, even if others have suffered more. Self-love grows when you stop ranking pain and start responding to it with gentleness. Mindfulness plays a central role in daily self-love. When you are mindful, you notice tension before it becomes overwhelm. You notice emotional shifts before they control you. You notice exhaustion before burnout arrives. This awareness allows you to respond instead of react. Buddhism teaches that mindful response is an expression of love toward yourself. It prevents unnecessary suffering by addressing it early. Another important practice is non-attachment to progress. Many people turn self-love into another performance, measuring how calm, healed, or spiritual they appear. Buddhism warns against this subtle trap. Attachment to being good at self-love creates pressure and comparison. True practice is quiet and private. It does not need validation. It shows itself in how gently you recover after falling, not in how perfect you appear. Self-love also means allowing yourself to be imperfect in public and private. Buddhism teaches that clinging to an image of who you should be creates fear. Fear of being seen, fear of failing, fear of disappointing others. When you allow imperfection, you allow freedom. You stop exhausting yourself by trying to control how you are perceived. This release restores energy and peace. Daily self-love includes choosing honesty over avoidance. It means being honest about what hurts, what you need, and what you can no longer carry. Avoidance may feel easier in the moment, but it creates deeper suffering over time. Buddhism teaches that facing reality with awareness is always kinder than escaping it unconsciously. When you face your truth gently, you strengthen trust in yourself. Another subtle aspect of self-love is consistency, not intensity, but consistency. You do not need dramatic practices or constant motivation. You need simple, repeatable acts of awareness. A mindful breath, a pause before reacting, a kind word to yourself. Over time, these small acts reshape your inner world. Buddhism teaches that consistency creates depth. Self-love also grows through acceptance of cycles. Some days will feel peaceful and clear. Other days will feel heavy and confusing. Buddhism teaches that both are part of the path. When you stop expecting constant clarity, you stop judging yourself for temporary darkness. Acceptance of cycles prevents despair and strengthens resilience. As self-love becomes a daily practice, self-worth stabilizes. You no longer rely on moods, success, or approval to feel okay. You trust your ability to care for yourself through change. This trust is more valuable than constant happiness. It creates inner safety. Buddhism ultimately teaches that self-love is not about becoming someone new. It is about relating differently to who you already are. It is about meeting each moment with awareness, patience, and compassion. When practiced daily, self-love transforms quietly. You become less reactive, less harsh, and more present. Life does not become perfect, but it becomes livable, meaningful, and gentle. Self-love is not a destination you arrive at and rest forever. It is a path you walk every day. And each time you choose awareness instead of judgment, patience instead of pressure, and compassion instead of cruelty, you are walking that path. 10. Loving yourself means letting life be what it is. Buddhism teaches that much of our suffering comes not from life itself, but from our resistance to it. We argue with reality in our minds. We tell ourselves that things should have happened differently, that people should have behaved better, that we should be further ahead, stronger, calmer, happier by now. This constant inner resistance creates tension, disappointment, and self-judgment. Over time, it slowly erodes self-love, because you begin to see yourself as someone who is always failing to meet an invisible standard. Buddhism offers a radical form of self-love by teaching acceptance, not as surrender, but as wisdom. Letting life be what it is does not mean giving up on growth or becoming passive. It means recognizing that fighting the present moment only creates additional suffering. When you reject what is happening, you also reject yourself within that moment. You tell yourself, "This version of me is not acceptable," simply because circumstances are not ideal. Buddhism teaches that self-love begins when you stop making your worth conditional on how well life is going. Many people confuse acceptance with weakness because they believe strength means control. Buddhism teaches a different kind of strength, the strength of non-resistance. When you stop resisting reality, you conserve energy. That energy can then be used for clarity, wise action, and healing. Resistance drains you. Acceptance stabilizes you. From this stability, change becomes possible without violence toward the self. A major source of inner conflict is the belief that life owes us certain outcomes. We expect fairness, consistency, and certainty. When life fails to deliver these, we feel betrayed. Buddhism teaches that clinging to expectations is a root cause of suffering. Expectations are mental constructions, not guarantees. When you base your peace on expectations, you place it on unstable ground. Letting go of rigid expectations is an act of self-love because it frees you from constant disappointment. Letting life be what it is also means allowing emotions to exist without trying to control or suppress them. Many people believe they must be calm at all times to be spiritually or emotionally mature. Buddhism teaches that emotions are natural responses to conditions. Trying to force calmness often leads to emotional suppression, which creates deeper suffering later. Self-love means allowing sadness when there is loss, fear when there is uncertainty, and frustration when boundaries are crossed, without turning these emotions into self-judgment. Buddhist wisdom emphasizes impermanence, the understanding that all experiences change. When you resist the present, you forget this truth. You treat discomfort as permanent and panic. When you remember impermanence, resistance softens. You realize that this moment, no matter how heavy, is moving. This awareness brings relief. You no longer feel trapped inside your experience. You trust change without needing to control it. Another layer of letting life be what it is involves releasing the need to constantly improve yourself. Many people turn self-growth into a form of self-rejection. They are always fixing, correcting, and upgrading themselves, rarely allowing rest. Buddhism teaches that growth without acceptance creates exhaustion. True growth includes periods of stillness. Self-love allows you to pause without guilt. It allows you to be unfinished without shame. Letting life be what it is also means releasing the illusion that you can control other people. Much suffering comes from trying to change others, earn their love, or manage their reactions. Buddhism teaches that attachment to others' behavior leads to frustration. You cannot control how people treat you, but you can control how much access they have to your inner peace. Self-love involves recognizing when to step back, set boundaries, or walk away without bitterness. Acceptance also applies to your own past. Many people replay old mistakes endlessly, believing they must keep reliving them to prevent repetition. Buddhism teaches that the past cannot be changed, only understood. Holding on to regret does not improve wisdom, it deepens suffering. Self-love means learning the lesson and releasing the punishment. You honor growth by moving forward, not by staying trapped in memory. Letting life be what it is creates emotional flexibility. Instead of breaking when plans change, you adapt. Instead of collapsing under disappointment, you adjust. Buddhism teaches that flexibility is a form of intelligence. A rigid mind suffers more because it cannot bend with reality. When you cultivate acceptance, you become more resilient, not because life becomes easier, but because you stop fighting its nature. Self-love also deepens when you stop labeling experiences as entirely good or bad. Buddhism teaches that reality is complex and layered. What feels painful now may later reveal wisdom. What feels pleasant now may later bring attachment. When you stop categorizing everything immediately, you allow life to unfold without constant mental commentary. This creates inner quiet. Letting life be what it is brings you closer to the present moment. When you stop arguing with reality, your attention returns to now, and the present moment is where peace, clarity, and groundedness exist. Buddhism teaches that suffering lives in resistance to now, while peace lives in acceptance of now. This form of self-love is subtle but powerful. It does not announce itself. It shows up as calm presence during difficulty. It shows up as patience with uncertainty. It shows up as gentleness when things do not go as planned. Over time, this acceptance reshapes your relationship with life. You feel less threatened by change. You trust yourself to handle whatever arises. Loving yourself means allowing life to be imperfect without seeing yourself as a failure. It means understanding that you are not meant to control every outcome, fix every emotion, or master every moment. Buddhism teaches that peace comes not from domination, but from harmony. When you move with life instead of against it, you feel supported rather than attacked by existence. This is the quiet transformation Buddhism points toward. Not becoming someone else, but learning how to be with what is. When you let life be what it is, you let yourself be what you are. And in that permission, self-love becomes natural, steady, and deeply freeing. 11. Loving yourself means choosing inner freedom over inner control. Buddhism teaches that many people believe they are free because they can make choices, speak their minds, or shape their lives externally, yet inside they remain tightly controlled by fear, habits, memories, and emotional reactions. True freedom, according to Buddhist wisdom, is not external independence, it is inner freedom. And self-love reaches its deepest form when you choose inner freedom over the constant need to control yourself, your emotions, and your experience. Most people live with an invisible inner controller. This controller monitors every thought, emotion, and reaction, constantly judging what is acceptable and what is not. When sadness appears, it says, "You shouldn't feel this." When fear arises, it says, "You need to get rid of this." When anger shows up, it says, "This makes you a bad person." Over time, this inner control creates exhaustion. You are not only living life, you are policing it. Buddhism teaches that this internal control is not discipline, it is fear disguised as responsibility. The need for control comes from the belief that certain inner experiences are dangerous or unacceptable. You try to control thoughts because you fear they define you. You try to control emotions because you fear they will overwhelm you. You try to control reactions because you fear judgment or loss. Buddhism teaches that this fear-based control fragments the mind. Instead of living as a whole being, you split yourself into parts that are allowed and parts that must be suppressed. This division weakens self-love because it teaches you that only certain versions of you are worthy of acceptance. Inner freedom begins when you stop fighting your inner world. Buddhism does not encourage indulgence or chaos. It encourages understanding. When you allow thoughts to arise without immediately trying to control or correct them, you begin to see their impermanent nature. When you allow emotions to be felt without labeling them as good or bad, they lose their intensity. Inner freedom is not about doing whatever you feel. It is about not being imprisoned by what you feel. One of the most radical acts of self-love is allowing yourself to feel without punishment. Many people punish themselves emotionally for being anxious, sad, confused, or uncertain. They add layers of shame on top of pain. Buddhism teaches that pain is unavoidable, but suffering is optional. Suffering begins when you resist pain or judge yourself for experiencing it. When you choose inner freedom, you allow pain to move through you without turning it into a personal failure. Buddhist wisdom explains that control creates tension, and tension keeps the mind rigid. A rigid mind cannot adapt, heal, or respond wisely. Inner freedom, on the other hand, creates flexibility. When you are not constantly controlling your inner experience, you become more present. You listen more deeply. You respond instead of react. You stop wasting energy on internal battles and redirect it toward clarity and compassion. Inner freedom also means releasing the belief that you must constantly improve yourself to be worthy. Many people turn self-development into self-surveillance. They monitor progress obsessively, criticize themselves for slowing down, and feel guilty for resting. Buddhism teaches that this obsession with improvement is another form of attachment. When you attach your worth to progress, you lose freedom. True self-love allows growth to happen without pressure. It trusts the process instead of trying to dominate it. Another layer of inner freedom involves letting go of the stories you tell about yourself. Stories like, "I am behind," "I always mess things up," or "This is just how I am," quietly shape behavior. Buddhism teaches that these stories are mental constructions, not truths. When you cling to them, you limit yourself. When you observe them without identification, they loosen their grip. Inner freedom arises when you no longer live inside rigid self-narratives. Choosing inner freedom also changes how you relate to mistakes. Instead of panicking or self-attacking, you observe, learn, and adjust. Buddhism teaches that wisdom grows through observation, not punishment. When you are free inside, mistakes do not threaten your identity. They become information, not evidence of inadequacy. This creates resilience and calm. Inner freedom deepens when you stop controlling outcomes. Many people try to manage life by anticipating every possible scenario. This constant mental effort creates anxiety. Buddhism teaches trust in impermanence. You cannot control how life unfolds, but you can control how tightly you cling. When you loosen your grip, life feels lighter. You stop bracing against the future and start meeting it with presence. Self-love becomes more stable when inner freedom replaces inner control. You no longer need to be perfect to feel okay. You no longer fear your own emotions. You no longer see discomfort as an enemy. Instead, you trust yourself to move through experience with awareness. This trust is powerful. It creates inner safety, which is more valuable than constant happiness. Inner freedom also transforms relationships. When you are not controlling yourself, you stop trying to control others. You communicate more honestly. You set boundaries without guilt. You walk away without resentment. Buddhism teaches that freedom within naturally expresses itself as respect outwardly. When you respect your inner world, you respect the autonomy of others. At its deepest level, Buddhism teaches that freedom is your true nature. Control is learned, fear is learned, judgment is learned. When you peel back these layers through awareness, what remains is spaciousness. In that spaciousness, self-love is not an effort. It is a natural state of allowing. Loving yourself, then, does not mean constantly correcting or improving who you are. It means trusting your capacity to experience life without imprisoning yourself within it. It means choosing awareness over control, compassion over judgment, and freedom over fear. When you choose inner freedom, you do not escape life. You meet it fully, openly, and with a quiet confidence that nothing inside you needs to be fought. This is the freedom Buddhism points toward, not the freedom to be someone else, but the freedom to be with yourself exactly as you are, without chains, without fear, and without conditions. 12. Loving yourself means living with gentle awareness, not harsh judgment. Buddhism teaches that the way you relate to your own mind determines the quality of your entire life. Two people can live through the same circumstances, face the same losses, and experience the same challenges, yet one suffers deeply while the other remains inwardly steady. The difference is not strength or luck. It is the presence of awareness instead of judgment. Self-love, in its most mature form, is the choice to live with gentle awareness rather than harsh self-judgment. Many people live under a constant inner judge. This judge comments on everything you do, think, or feel. It criticizes your emotions, questions your decisions, and reminds you of past mistakes. Even when things go well, it looks for flaws. When things go wrong, it becomes merciless. Buddhism teaches that this inner judge is not wisdom. It is conditioning. It is a voice learned from fear, comparison, and survival, not from truth. Harsh judgment creates an inner environment where healing cannot happen. When you judge yourself constantly, your mind remains tense. You are always bracing, always defending, always trying to prove that you are not failing. Buddhism teaches that tension clouds awareness. A tense mind cannot see clearly, and without clarity, suffering repeats itself. This is why judgment keeps people stuck in the very patterns they want to escape. Gentle awareness works differently. Awareness observes without attacking. It notices without labeling. It sees what is happening without immediately turning it into a story about who you are. When you live with awareness, you still recognize mistakes, unhealthy habits, and painful emotions, but you meet them with curiosity instead of condemnation. This shift changes everything. When the mind feels safe, it becomes honest, and honesty is the beginning of transformation. Buddhism teaches that awareness is already compassionate by nature. You do not need to force kindness when you are truly aware. Awareness understands context. It sees how past experiences shaped your reactions. It recognizes fear beneath anger and exhaustion beneath irritability. Judgment only sees failure. Awareness sees causes and conditions. This understanding dissolves shame and replaces it with clarity. Many people believe judgment keeps them disciplined, but Buddhism teaches that discipline rooted in fear collapses under pressure. When life becomes difficult, the harsh inner voice grows louder, not wiser. It drains energy instead of guiding it. Gentle awareness, on the other hand, remains steady even in hardship. It does not abandon you when you struggle. It stays present, offering direction without cruelty. Living with gentle awareness also means allowing yourself to be human. Buddhism teaches that imperfection is not a flaw, it is the nature of existence. Expecting perfection creates suffering because it demands something that cannot exist. When you judge yourself for being human, you reject reality. When you accept your humanity, you align with reality. Self-love grows in alignment, not resistance. Awareness also changes how you relate to your past. Judgment keeps you trapped in regret, replaying mistakes as evidence of unworthiness. Awareness looks at the past to understand, not to punish. It asks, "What was I dealing with then?" instead of, "What is wrong with me?" This perspective allows learning without self-hatred. Growth becomes a continuation, not a correction. Another powerful aspect of gentle awareness is how it transforms emotional pain. When pain arises and judgment follows, suffering doubles. You feel pain, then you feel bad about feeling pain. Buddhism teaches that awareness interrupts this cycle. When you allow pain to exist without labeling it as weakness or failure, it softens. Emotions move more freely when they are not resisted or judged. This creates emotional resilience. Gentle awareness also improves relationships. When you stop judging yourself harshly, you stop projecting judgment onto others. You become more patient, more understanding, and less reactive. Buddhism teaches that the way you treat yourself becomes the way you treat the world. Inner gentleness creates outer harmony. Living with awareness does not mean becoming passive or ignoring problems. It means addressing problems without violence toward yourself. You can set boundaries without guilt. You can change habits without shame. You can grow without self-rejection. Buddhism teaches that change rooted in awareness is stable because it does not depend on fear. Self-love deepens when you stop monitoring yourself for mistakes and start listening to yourself for truth. Awareness listens, judgment interrupts. Awareness asks what you need. Judgment tells you what you should be. One builds trust, the other destroys it. Over time, gentle awareness becomes a way of life. You catch yourself sooner, you soften faster, you recover more quickly. You do not spiral as deeply because you are not attacking yourself from the inside. Life still challenges you, but you are no longer fighting yourself on top of everything else. Buddhism teaches that liberation does not come from becoming flawless. It comes from seeing clearly. When you replace harsh judgment with gentle awareness, you free yourself from inner conflict. Self-love stops being an effort and becomes a natural expression of understanding. This is the quiet wisdom Buddhism offers, not self-improvement through pressure, but self-liberation through awareness. When you live with gentle awareness, you stop trying to fix yourself and start understanding yourself. And in that understanding, peace, compassion, and self-worth arise naturally, without force, without conditions, and without fear. 13. Loving yourself means walking your path without abandoning yourself. Buddhism teaches that one of the deepest forms of suffering comes from self-abandonment. This does not always look dramatic. It often appears quietly, in small daily moments where you ignore your feelings, silence your intuition, tolerate what hurts you, or push yourself beyond your limits just to meet expectations. Many people believe self-abandonment is necessary to survive, to be loved, or to succeed. Buddhism gently reveals that every time you abandon yourself, you move further away from peace, clarity, and self-worth. Walking your path without abandoning yourself means staying inwardly present with who you are, even when life becomes difficult. It means you do not disappear from your own life just to please others, avoid conflict, or escape discomfort. Buddhism teaches that true strength is not endurance at the cost of the self, but loyalty to awareness. When you remain present with yourself, even in pain, you build a relationship of trust that becomes the foundation of self-love. Many people abandon themselves because they fear rejection. They silence their needs, suppress their boundaries, and override their inner voice to maintain connection. Buddhism teaches that attachment rooted in fear always creates suffering. When you trade your inner truth for approval, you may keep people close, but you lose yourself. Over time, this loss manifests as emptiness, resentment, and exhaustion. Self-love means choosing inner honesty over external validation, even when it feels uncomfortable. Self-abandonment also appears in how people chase paths that are not aligned with their nature. They follow careers, relationships, lifestyles, or beliefs that feel wrong inside, simply because they seem expected or admired. Buddhism teaches that when you walk a path that is not yours, no amount of success will bring peace. Your body will resist. Your mind will grow restless. Your heart will feel disconnected. Loving yourself means listening when something inside says, "This is not right for me," and having the courage to respond. Walking your path does not mean life will be easy or free of doubt. Buddhism does not promise certainty, it teaches presence. When you stay with yourself through uncertainty, you develop inner stability. You stop needing guarantees to move forward. You trust your capacity to adapt. This trust is a form of self-love that cannot be taken away by failure or change. Another way people abandon themselves is by ignoring emotional signals. Fatigue, sadness, irritability, and numbness are often treated as weaknesses to be pushed through. Buddhism teaches that these signals are not enemies, they are messages. When you listen to them with awareness, you prevent deeper suffering. When you ignore them repeatedly, the body and mind eventually demand attention through burnout or illness. Self-love means responding early, not waiting until collapse. Walking your path also means allowing yourself to change. Many people cling to old identities because they fear losing acceptance. Buddhism teaches impermanence, the truth that everything changes, including you. When you refuse to evolve to remain familiar to others, you abandon your growth. Loving yourself means giving yourself permission to outgrow roles, beliefs, and versions of yourself that no longer fit. Growth is not betrayal, it is alignment. Buddhism also teaches non-attachment to outcomes. When you walk your path, results may differ from expectations. You may fail, stumble, or feel lost at times. Self-abandonment occurs when you judge yourself harshly during these moments and withdraw care. Self-love means staying present even when things do not go as planned. It means saying, "I am still here with myself, regardless of success or failure." Walking your path requires patience. Buddhism teaches that rushing creates suffering. Many people pressure themselves to have answers, clarity, and direction immediately. When clarity does not arrive, they panic and abandon themselves emotionally. Self-love means allowing your path to unfold gradually. You do not need to know everything to keep going. You need awareness, honesty, and compassion. Another subtle form of self-abandonment is constant self-distraction. Filling every quiet moment with noise, activity, or stimulation prevents you from hearing your inner truth. Buddhism teaches the value of stillness because stillness reveals alignment. When you avoid stillness, you avoid yourself. Loving yourself means allowing quiet moments where you can check in, feel honestly, and reconnect. Walking your path without abandoning yourself also transforms how you make decisions. Instead of choosing based solely on fear, pressure, or comparison, you choose based on inner resonance. Buddhism teaches that wisdom arises from listening deeply. When a choice feels heavy, draining, or self-betraying, awareness notices. When a choice feels calm, clear, and grounded, awareness recognizes that too. Self-love is trusting this inner guidance. This does not mean isolating yourself or rejecting others. Buddhism teaches interconnection, but not self-erasure. You can care deeply for others without losing yourself. You can compromise without disappearing. You can love without self-sacrifice that harms your spirit. True compassion includes yourself. As you practice staying with yourself, something changes. You feel less anxious about others' opinions. You recover more quickly from disappointment. You stop forcing yourself to fit places where you do not belong. Life becomes simpler, not because challenges disappear, but because you are no longer divided inside. Buddhism teaches that peace arises when there is no inner contradiction. When your actions align with your awareness, there is ease. When you stop abandoning yourself, you stop creating inner conflict. Self-love becomes less about affirmations and more about presence. You are there for yourself when it matters most. Walking your path without abandoning yourself is not dramatic. It happens quietly, in moments where you choose honesty over silence, rest over pressure, and alignment over approval. Over time, these choices shape a life that feels authentic and grounded. This is the kind of self-love Buddhism points toward. Not self-obsession, not ego, but loyalty to awareness. When you walk your path with yourself fully present, you realize you were never meant to abandon yourself to survive. You were meant to walk with yourself, through every season, with patience, courage, and compassion. 14. Loving yourself means trusting the quiet wisdom within you. Buddhism teaches that beneath all confusion, doubt, and noise, there exists a quiet wisdom within you that already knows how to move through life. This wisdom does not shout, it does not argue, it does not rush. It speaks softly, often through feelings, subtle resistance, calm clarity, or gentle unease. Many people lose touch with this inner wisdom because they are trained to distrust themselves. They are taught to seek answers outside, to follow louder voices, stronger opinions, and clearer rules. Over time, they forget how to listen inwardly. Loving yourself, in its deepest form, means learning to trust this quiet inner wisdom again. Most people are not disconnected from wisdom because they lack intelligence or insight. They are disconnected because they live in constant noise. Noise from expectations, fear, comparison, urgency, and self-doubt. Buddhism teaches that wisdom is not something you acquire, it is something you uncover when the noise settles. When the mind becomes quieter, truth becomes more visible. Loving yourself means creating the inner conditions where this wisdom can be heard. Many people ignore their inner wisdom because it does not always offer convenient answers. It may tell you to slow down when the world demands speed. It may tell you to rest when others expect productivity. It may tell you to walk away from situations that look successful on the surface but feel empty inside. Trusting this wisdom requires courage, because it often asks you to disappoint expectations, delay gratification, or choose uncertainty over familiarity. Buddhism teaches that self-love includes the courage to honor inner truth, even when it is uncomfortable. One reason people struggle to trust themselves is because they confuse wisdom with perfection. They believe trusting themselves means never making mistakes. Buddhism teaches the opposite. Wisdom does not prevent mistakes. It helps you learn from them without self-destruction. When you trust your inner wisdom, you allow yourself to experiment, adjust, and grow. Mistakes become part of learning, not proof of failure. Self-love grows when you stop demanding certainty from yourself and start trusting your ability to respond. Inner wisdom often communicates through the body. Tension, heaviness, fatigue, or unease are not random. Buddhism teaches mindfulness of the body because the body often knows before the mind admits. When you force yourself into situations that betray your values, the body reacts. When you align with truth, the body softens. Loving yourself means listening to these signals instead of overriding them for approval or fear. Many people abandon inner wisdom because they fear being alone. Trusting yourself may mean walking a path others do not understand. Buddhism teaches that loneliness comes not from walking alone, but from abandoning yourself. When you trust your inner guidance, you may lose some external validation, but you gain internal companionship. This inner companionship is more stable than approval because it does not disappear when opinions change. Buddhism also teaches that wisdom arises from stillness. When life is constantly busy, reactive, and overstimulated, wisdom cannot surface. Loving yourself means allowing moments of quiet without distraction. Silence is not emptiness, it is space. In that space, you begin to recognize patterns, feel truth more clearly, and understand what truly matters. Many people fear silence because it brings unresolved feelings to the surface. Buddhism teaches that these feelings are not obstacles to wisdom, they are gateways. Trusting inner wisdom also means releasing the need for constant reassurance. Many people seek validation before every decision because they do not trust their own perception. Over time, this dependence weakens self-confidence and clarity. Buddhism teaches that wisdom strengthens through use. Each time you listen to yourself and act with awareness, trust deepens. Even when outcomes are uncertain, inner confidence grows because you know you acted honestly. Another barrier to trusting inner wisdom is attachment to identity. People cling to roles such as being strong, successful, agreeable, or spiritual. When inner wisdom challenges these identities, fear arises. Buddhism teaches non-attachment to identity because identity is fluid. Loving yourself means allowing wisdom to reshape who you are over time. You are not betraying yourself when you change. You are responding to deeper understanding. Inner wisdom also guides boundaries. It tells you when something is no longer healthy, even if it once was. Many people ignore this guidance because they fear conflict or loss. Buddhism teaches that boundaries are not acts of rejection, they are acts of clarity. When you trust your inner wisdom, you stop explaining yourself excessively. You act with calm firmness, knowing you are protecting inner peace. Trusting yourself does not mean rejecting guidance from others. Buddhism values learning and humility. The difference is discernment. Inner wisdom allows you to receive advice without losing yourself. You listen openly but decide inwardly. Self-love means knowing that no one else lives inside your experience. Others can offer perspective, but you are the one who must live with your choices. As trust in inner wisdom deepens, anxiety softens. Much anxiety comes from second-guessing, overthinking, and fearing regret. When you trust yourself, you accept that uncertainty is part of life. You stop trying to control every outcome. Buddhism teaches that wisdom works with impermanence, not against it. You make the best choice you can with awareness, then release attachment to results. This trust also transforms how you relate to fear. Fear does not disappear, but it no longer dominates. You recognize fear as information, not command. Inner wisdom helps you distinguish between fear that protects and fear that limits. Loving yourself means listening without obeying blindly. Trusting the quiet wisdom within you creates a sense of inner stability. You stop rushing for answers. You stop forcing clarity. You allow insight to arrive in its own time. Buddhism teaches that when the mind is calm and present, wisdom arises naturally. You do not chase it, you create conditions for it. Over time, this trust becomes a way of life. Decisions feel less dramatic, mistakes feel less threatening. You feel grounded even when life is uncertain. Self-love becomes less about fixing yourself and more about honoring your inner guidance. Buddhism teaches that enlightenment is not becoming someone extraordinary, it is becoming deeply aligned with what is already true. When you trust the quiet wisdom within you, you return to that truth. You stop outsourcing your life, you stop abandoning yourself. You live with authenticity, patience, and calm confidence. This is one of the deepest forms of self-love. Not constant self-affirmation, but self-trust. Not controlling life, but listening to it. When you trust the wisdom within you, you realize you were never lost. You were simply disconnected from the voice that has always known the way. 15. Loving yourself means allowing yourself to become who you are, not who you were taught to be. Buddhism teaches that much of our inner suffering comes from living a life shaped by conditioning rather than awareness. From a very young age, we are taught who we should be, how we should behave, what success looks like, and what parts of ourselves are acceptable. Over time, these teachings become internal rules. We follow them automatically, often without questioning whether they align with our true nature. Loving yourself, at its deepest level, means gently unlearning what was imposed on you and allowing yourself to become who you truly are beneath those layers. Many people confuse conditioning with identity. They believe their fears, limitations, people-pleasing tendencies, or constant self-doubt are simply who they are. Buddhism teaches that these patterns are learned responses, shaped by experiences, culture, trauma, and survival needs. They are not your essence. When you identify completely with conditioning, you live in a narrow space, constantly trying to meet expectations that may have nothing to do with your inner truth. Self-love begins when you recognize that you are more than what you were taught to be. Allowing yourself to become who you are does not happen all at once. It unfolds slowly, often through discomfort. When you begin questioning old beliefs, the mind resists. It prefers familiarity, even if that familiarity causes suffering. Buddhism teaches that discomfort often arises when awareness challenges conditioning. This discomfort is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that something untrue is loosening its grip. Many people fear becoming themselves because they worry they will lose love, approval, or belonging. Conditioning often teaches that love is conditional, something you earn by being agreeable, successful, quiet, strong, or useful. Buddhism gently reveals that love rooted in conditions is fragile. When you abandon yourself to maintain approval, you may belong outwardly, but inwardly you feel alone. Loving yourself means choosing inner belonging over external acceptance, even when that choice feels risky. Becoming who you are also requires grieving who you were taught to be. This grief is often overlooked. You may grieve the version of yourself that tried so hard to please, to survive, to fit in. You may grieve lost time, suppressed dreams, or ignored needs. Buddhism teaches that grief is not weakness, it is honesty. Allowing grief to surface without judgment is an act of self-respect. It honors the truth of your experience and creates space for something new. Another challenge in becoming yourself is releasing comparison. Conditioning teaches you to measure yourself against others, to define worth through status, achievement, or conformity. Buddhism teaches that comparison is rooted in ignorance of uniqueness. No two lives have the same causes, conditions, or lessons. When you stop comparing, you stop trying to become a copy. You begin listening inwardly. Self-love grows when you allow your path to be different without seeing difference as failure. Allowing yourself to become who you are also means accepting change. As awareness deepens, your values may shift. What once mattered may no longer feel important. Relationships may change. Priorities may realign. Buddhism teaches impermanence, reminding us that change is not betrayal, it is life unfolding. When you resist change to remain familiar to others or to your past self, you block growth. Loving yourself means giving yourself permission to evolve without guilt. Many people hold on to old identities because they fear emptiness. They believe that without roles, labels, or achievements, they will disappear. Buddhism teaches that beneath identity is presence. Presence is not empty, it is alive, aware, and responsive. When you loosen your grip on identity, you do not vanish. You become more real. You respond to life instead of acting from scripts. Becoming yourself also means allowing complexity. Conditioning often demands consistency. Be strong all the time, be kind all the time, be productive all the time. Buddhism teaches that life is dynamic. You will have contradictory feelings, changing needs, and evolving perspectives. Loving yourself means allowing this complexity without self-judgment. You do not need to simplify yourself to be acceptable. This process also requires patience. Unlearning conditioning takes time. You may notice yourself falling back into old patterns, doubting your intuition, or silencing your needs. Buddhism teaches compassion toward the process. Self-love does not punish you for forgetting. It welcomes you back when you remember. Each return strengthens awareness. As you allow yourself to become who you are, you may feel fear, fear of the unknown, fear of judgment, fear of making mistakes. Buddhism teaches that fear is a natural response to change. Loving yourself means allowing fear to exist without letting it decide for you. You acknowledge fear, thank it for trying to protect you, and continue listening to deeper wisdom. Becoming yourself also reshapes how you define success. Success is no longer measured by how closely you match expectations, but by how aligned you feel inside. You may choose simplicity over status, peace over approval, meaning over recognition. Buddhism teaches that alignment brings peace because it removes inner contradiction. When your actions reflect your awareness, you feel whole. This form of self-love is not loud or performative. It does not seek attention. It shows itself in quiet choices, saying no when something feels wrong, resting when you are tired, speaking honestly even when your voice shakes, leaving situations that diminish you, and staying present with yourself through uncertainty. These choices may seem small, but they shape a life of integrity. Over time, allowing yourself to become who you are creates inner stability. You rely less on external validation. You recover more quickly from criticism. You feel grounded even when life is unpredictable. Buddhism teaches that peace arises when there is no inner conflict between who you are and who you pretend to be. Loving yourself, then, is not about constant affirmation or confidence. It is about authenticity. It is about living in truth rather than performance. When you allow yourself to become who you are, you stop fighting yourself. You stop dividing your energy. Life becomes simpler, not because challenges disappear, but because you are no longer at war with your own nature. Buddhism teaches that liberation begins when ignorance ends. Ignorance is not lack of knowledge, it is misunderstanding of the self. When you unlearn what you were taught to be and return to awareness, you remember your true nature. In that remembering, self-love becomes effortless. You no longer need to convince yourself you are worthy. You simply live from the truth that you always were. This is the deepest invitation Buddhism offers, not to become someone better, but to become someone real. When you allow yourself to become who you are, you do not lose yourself. You finally meet yourself. Buddhism teaches that self-love is not something you add to yourself, but something you uncover by removing what was never truly you. As you reflect on these beliefs, a quiet truth becomes clear. You were never broken, incomplete, or unworthy. You were simply conditioned to forget your own nature. Through comparison, fear, pressure, and self-judgment, you learn to live away from yourself. The path of self-love is the path of coming back. This journey does not require perfection. It does not demand that you heal everything at once or become calm forever. It only asks for awareness, patience, and honesty. Each time you choose compassion over cruelty, presence over avoidance, and truth over performance, you return a little more to yourself. That return is transformation. Buddhist self-love is gentle. It does not rush you. It does not shame you for struggling. It walks with you through confusion, pain, growth, and change. It reminds you that peace is already within you, waiting beneath the noise. When you stop forcing yourself to be someone else, life begins to feel lighter. When you stop abandoning yourself, self-worth becomes steady. When you trust your inner wisdom, clarity replaces fear. You do not need to become more to deserve peace. You need to remember who you are beneath expectations. Let self-love be a daily practice of awareness, a quiet loyalty to your inner truth, and a gentle commitment to walk your path without leaving yourself behind. In doing so, you will not only transform your life, but also experience it with more depth, meaning, and compassion. This is the heart of Buddhist self-love, not fixing yourself, but finally being with yourself fully, honestly, and without conditions.